Hello everyone, and welcome to another fortnight session of Great Shouts. Every fortnight we come together with the community. We have a specialist in the community who presents on a particular topic for 30 minutes, well, for 20 minutes, and then we have kind of questions at the end for 10 minutes as well. I'm your host, Ed Davidson. I'm a fractional head of marketing. And today we've got Evie, and Evie's going to be talking about all things how to build SEO friendly content for B2B websites. So Evie, if you want to share your screen, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Okay, just give me the heads up, Evie, to just do next slide, and I'll do it like that.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to try and whiz through this in 15 minutes. So I'm going to talk very fast. Okay, so I am going to talk about, obviously, more broadly speaking, how to build SEO-friendly content for B2B websites. So what I'm going to go through more specifically is preparing your keyword research in order to do that in the first place, then understanding your content gaps, and then producing and optimizing that content. So next slide, please. Next slide again. So when we look at SEO and content more generally, the first thing that we want to do is actually conduct some keyword research. Why that is because you want to look at your own landscape, but you also want to look at your competitive landscape in terms of what's already there. So what you want to do is use
Adrian, sorry, I don't know if you want to mute yourself. I'll try and do that through it, but just hear background there. Thank you.
Yeah, so essentially what you want to do is you want to use a tool like Ahrefs, which I've linked in the slides there, but there are obviously loads of other tools that you can use. And you want to go and essentially do some research around your products or services and the features and like sort of more your business name, your competitors' business names. And that's obviously going to be very specific to, you know, your own kind of little what's it called, your little universe essentially. But you also want to think slightly more broadly in terms of kind of your thought leadership. So you don't just want to look at, you know, your products, your services, etc., but you want to look a little bit more broadly. And the second thing you kind of want to do once you've got your keyword research is, you know, keyword research isn't really useful until you've actually categorized it. So that categorization looks like this. This is kind of what I've started doing for my own business. It's quite granular because what you want to do is you want to create a keyword research that is quite big. You don't want to come back with just kind of 50 keywords or 100 keywords. You do actually want to go probably into the thousands. So one of my clients, for example, is quite a small website. They have maybe 100 pages. And they are they've got a list of 5,000 keywords. So it really, that's kind of to show you the scale that you want to look at here, because you do want to look at quite more broadly in terms of the content topics that people are searching for around your business and your space, essentially. So what you want to do then, as I say, is categorize it, but you want to categorize it quite granularly. So you want to have a category, a subcategory, and kind of look as granularly as possible when you're categorizing this. And then you want to look at the user intent behind keywords, the target audience that might be searching for those keywords, because, you know, if you've got a business that has multiple different target audiences, then obviously you're going to be creating different content for different people. And also the content type. So is it editorial? Is it product? Is it service led? Is it thought leadership? What kind of content is it? Now, tip for me, you can use AI to do this more quickly. So what I tend to do is I categorize 10% of my keyword research, and then I feed that back into an AI engine and say, look at this, what I've just categorized, and categorize the rest of the keyword research by all of these categories as well. You will have to review it, but it just takes out a lot of the legwork. Next slide, please. And again. So in terms of, once you've got your content, your keyword research, and you're looking at your topics and your topic clusters or categories, what you can then do is you can essentially really kind of start to understand where the gaps are in your content. So what you want to do is you want to go to your website, and you want to go in the search bar of your website, and you want to start using those topics essentially to look at what content's already on your website. Now, some sites don't have a search bar at all. Some don't have a functional search bar. So you can do this in Google as well. You just use the cite command, which you can see here at the bottom with the blue text. You can just put in your website and then in quotation marks the topic that you want to search for on your website, and it'll pull out all the pages that are relevant. Next slide, please. So the other thing that you then want to do is, you've got your content gaps, you know what content is on your website, you know what's not there, you know what might need creation and optimization. What you want to do is work out what stage of the marketing funnel you want to align the content to that's existent in your gaps. So you might have, top of funnel content that you need to create. You might have bottom of funnel content that you need to create, but don't just think about the stages of the funnel to prioritize your content by. Think about the search volumes that align with all of your different content topics as well, to prioritize what needs to be created first, what you can look at in terms of optimization as well. And don't forget, not all content is created equal. So when you're doing your keyword research, don't just go super, super, super broad. Really make sure that you're searching for content topics that are actually aligned to content that you can create that will eventually convert. So you don't just want to create content for the sake of creating content just because it's broadly relevant to your business. You really want to make sure that you're actually creating that content for conversion purposes, even if it is top of the funnel at the start, as long as it's nurturing the audience to eventually drop down into lower funnels, then that's great. Thank you. So yeah, going into producing and optimizing content now. Next slide, please. Cool. So when you're doing your content production, there's lots of different things that you need to bear in mind. So your target audience, we talked about, user behaviors, we talked about, content gaps, obviously, and then content formats I'll go through in a minute, and then content pillars. So content pillars are essentially the very broad overarching topics that you want to be known for. So every business should have around 4 or 5, tops 5 of these. And essentially everything that you produce on your site should align to these content pillars, and not just your site, but anything that you might do on social media if it's relevant to you. Anywhere, any content that you produce anywhere should really align back to these content pillars. So to give you an example of what I do in my business, I have one massive overarching content pillar that's digital strategy, and then it filters down into content marketing, SEO, and PPC. And that's essentially all of my content is related to that, very broadly speaking. Next slide, please. Cool. So then in terms of the actual content formats, now there are loads of different content formats. This is only 9 of loads of other formats that you could look at producing. The thing to think about again here is what's most useful to the user. So some information might be really useful in a video. Some information might be really useful in a study. Some might be better in a white paper. But if you kind of put yourself in the mind of the user, always think about where they might be in their mindset to create the content that they'll need in the format that they need it. That doesn't mean that you need to necessarily create content in loads of different formats to reach everyone. It just means where's the majority going to be? Obviously, people learn in different ways and digest information in different ways, but just always have a think about your target audience. How are they best going to be digesting that information, and create the content and the format in line with that. Next slide, please. Cool. Okay, so this is a much more specific to SEO in terms of, so Google has a framework that's called EEAT. And essentially, it's kind of a framework that they measure any sort of rankings and anything like that by. And it stands for expertise, experience, authority, and trust. Nearly forgot all of those then. So basically, they mean that everything that you do has to have great user experience. It's got to have expertise and be factual. It's got to have authority behind it and trust. And authority and trust are actually quite similar in terms of what that means. So they're the ones where you would get links from external websites back to your website to show that you're trustworthy and that you're actually an authority in your space. So one kind of key thing that you can do that's quite actionable sooner rather than later, that kind of falls into this framework, is, if you haven't done this already, is to pull out quick links within your blog content. And quick links are essentially links at the top of your blogs that drill down into specific sections in your content. And the reason why this is really important is because oftentimes when a user comes to a blog post, they don't want to read the entire blog post to try and get to the content that they're trying to get an answer to. So in order to get them there more quickly, you can give them these links and they can just dive right into the thing that they actually came to your blog post for to begin with, which is a lot more helpful to them and doesn't mean that they have to hunt around your content to try and find what they're looking for. And I think that also aligns with, structuring your blog posts when you're writing them. So you want to make sure that they've all got really structured subheadings, and they're, really useful to kind of read through so that it's much more easy for users to actually interact with your content, essentially. Next slide, please. Cool. So this is the final part, a few slides here on optimizing content. So the first bit is to look at your page title and your URL. The page title isn't the main header on your page that you see. The page title is actually this little header that you see in the search results, and it's also shown in the browser tab. So it's essentially a header that you see in the search results, basically. And it should not be longer than 60 characters, ideally, because Google will truncate it. To be honest, most of the time, Google actually rewrites these anyway, dependent on the search query, but it's better for you to have something there already for Google to pick from than for them to make it up and make something completely random that just isn't actually relevant at all. If your domain and your business name are different from each other, make sure you're adding your business name into the page title as well. If they're the same, you don't really need to worry about it because it'll already be there, as you'll see from the Shopify result there. The URL, just make sure it's really as succinct as possible, but also make sure that it follows the navigation on your website. So basically, you want to make sure that wherever a page sits on your website, it's really clear from the URL how deep in the website the page sits and how it relates to the rest of your website. That's just for Google to understand how the page relates to the rest of your site. Next slide, please. Okay. The meta description also isn't visible on your page. It's the small description underneath the page title in the search results. It isn't a ranking factor for Google, but it is really important when it comes to click-through rates. So make sure that you are adding calls to action there. What do you want the user to do next? And also make sure it's not more than 156 characters, because again, Google will truncate it if it's longer than that. Next slide, please. Okay, and then we've got the H1 and the body copy. The H1 is the main header on your page that people can see. So make sure that you're including keywords here. It's not, it doesn't have like a character limit or anything, but I would say keep it to 60 characters if you can, just because that then avoids huge long chunks of header text that people have to read through. And make sure that if it's on a product or service page or a features page, that you're including the name of the product, service, or feature. The body copy, obviously you want to optimize that for key terms as well from within your keyword research, and also make sure you're including calls to action. The calls to action, you want to make sure that they align with the rest of your page. So if you've got broader like calls to action buttons, make sure you're not kind of deviating from that, because you don't want to give the user too many options essentially in terms of taking an action. And then next slide, please. I think we've only got 3 more. So alt text is this isn't visible on a page either. It's the metadata behind the images that show up on your page. Essentially, this is more useful for those who are visually impaired. Make sure that you're adding keywords in from or not even necessarily keywords, but more describing the picture. They do have some impact in Google image search. Make sure they're not over 100 characters, because that's the character limit there. Yep, next slide, please. And then your breadcrumb structure is essentially the little links menu that's like underneath the menu or all the way at the bottom of a page, depending on how it's been implemented. They essentially help users understand where they are on the page. They also help Google understand how pages relate to each other on your website. And they also are really important from an internal linking perspective. So it just drives authority through the rest of the website. We kind of talked about it in the EAT slide, that authority piece. Next slide, please. I think this is the final one. So when talking about internal links, it's really important to have internal links on your website, not just in breadcrumb structures or your navigation, but actually in your main text, because you want to make sure that you, provide additional value. So you're not just kind of linking to other content from within your content for link's sake, but you're actually giving users additional information that they might be interested in when they're reading through your content. And secondly, it does also help the search engine understand, again, how pages relate to each other. It gives authority to the rest of those pages. And it's just really important to sort of continue driving that authority through the website, through those internal links. Make sure you're not massively stuffing internal links into your content. So the rule of thumb would be 1 per 100 words max. If you can keep it to less than that, even better, because you don't want to make it look really link heavy. Essentially, you don't want to overload your user with too many options. If you can link to products or services that are relevant to your content from your blog, then it's always a really good idea to do that as well, because again, it kind of drives that additional action to get users to think about your products and services and trying to kind of drive them down the funnel. I believe that's everything. I rambled very quickly.
Thank you, Evie. Yeah, awesome. Loads of really useful content in there. And I know there's already a question that's come in about if we're showing the deck. And yeah, when I put the recording on YouTube and I share it out to the community, then I'll include the deck on there. If you can, it's on Google Slides, so we can do it in that way. Cool. We've got some time for questions always at the end. So I normally kind of chip in where I can, but we've got some good questions coming in here. So I'll pose those to you now. So when you were going through, how AI can help, and I think, there's sometimes the assumption that AI can do everything for us here, and it certainly can't, but where it is useful, have you got any kind of tools that you really recommend that you can, give to the guys here?
Yeah, so I more specifically for like the categorization piece, I would recommend a tool called Rose, literally just Rose, which is basically Excel, but just on something. So you can essentially plug in loads of tools into that tool, and it'll help with things like categorization and things like that as well. I mean, the standard one that everyone else would also highlight would be ChatGPT, just because again, that's a very useful one to just throw some data into and get it back out of. But those are the two that I would suggest.
Yeah, I haven't heard of Rose before. That's interesting. Yeah, it'd be good to see what results it spits out from that. And so I suppose in terms of like a follow-up to that one, how much of your time do you think is being kind of saved through AI in terms of content creation or help? Or is it just kind of spitting out either generic or incorrect results, which are too broad and therefore it just hinders things?
I think that's the thing. So I don't really use it for content creation because of that. I would use it for things like outlines if I feel like I'm not getting the ideas that I want to get from my own brain. Or for categorization and stuff like that. And when it comes to categorization, it saves me hours. Really hours, because it takes so long to go through those lists and really categorize everything down. But like you kind of say, you've got to be really specific with prompts and stuff like that, because otherwise it does just kind of throw really random stuff at you that isn't really helpful.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, other question. How do you deal with situations where a keyword is important to your client, but it doesn't have enough search volume? Do you still include this in your content strategy?
So this is where the categorization and the topic clusters and all that sort of thing is really important, because I don't focus on specific keywords, like just one keyword. I would focus on a topic and then say, right, okay, these are the keywords within the topic. As many of these that you can naturally fit into content and you can, look at ranking for, et cetera, great, but don't focus so specifically on keywords, because the keywords in and of themselves just don't really mean anything anymore. Google's gotten a lot more intelligent about being able to rank content that isn't optimized for a very specific keyword. So, you don't necessarily have to worry so much about really specific keywords, just more about, the topics overall, and trying to be able to fit in the keywords that fit where you can.
And there's a follow-up here about kind of, is there a logic and kind of model you follow for categorization?
Logic or model, I think, other than the specific types of category columns that I mentioned earlier, not really. It really is just, I use category, subcategory, and then just basically categorize 10% of my keyword research and then throw it into AI and see what comes back, essentially. There's no like in terms of like broad logic, no, not really. It depends on the client, basically. It really depends on every single website. They're all different.
Makes sense. And then like other kind of helpful tools in terms of optimization for like meta description and kind of testing. I have seen back in the day in terms of my SEO knowledge that, particular kind of testing tools to see if you can improve, not necessarily improvements in rankings, but improvements in that click-through rate. Have they used any tools successfully there, or have they kind of been phased out?
I think back in the day, there used to be like talk around like A/B testing and stuff like that. But to be honest, from an SEO perspective, I would strongly recommend to stay away from that, because any sort of A/B testing that you do on an SEO page, you're just going to confuse the algorithm. So if you're looking to do testing, I would say put the meta description up, see what happens, take a month or 2 or 3, see what happens, then tweak it, stay for another 2, 3 months, and that's the best way to test it, is to just tweak it ongoing rather than using tools to try and sort of A/B test anything.
Makes sense, loud and clear. In terms of the content for particular stages in the funnel, do you kind of have a kind of recommendation of what the next best action should be based on where they're on the funnel? So if it's more like informational, is it best to try and capture someone's email address in that way, rather than if it's like a money term where it's slightly lower down to be able to drive them through to becoming a lead?
Yeah, I would say so. If they are top of funnel, especially when it's B2B, you know, the sales cycle is so much longer. So, you know, you really want to try and nurture the audience a bit more when you know that they might be interested in buying down the line, or they're interested in your content, etc. It is much better to capture them via email essentially, and then try and sort of create a purchase that way. I think in terms of like content that you create on your website, obviously you can create content for every stage of the funnel, but you're not necessarily going to drive someone down all the way down the marketing funnel in one website visit or two or three. So, you know, you want to have the content there, but it is more likely that when someone comes in from top of funnel, you're going to have to nurture them through emails and that sort of channel.
Makes sense. So we're nearly at time here, but I suppose I've got one last one, just in terms of, you know, this is really a kind of B2B versus B2C. B2B, there's often lots of decision makers that will be part of that process. There's essentially a decision-making unit. Do you see like a real clear distinction for, you know, optimizing sites for you know, B2B versus how you'd approach it for B2C? Thinking about those, you know, buying personas within decision-making unit there.
I think yes, to an extent, because often with B2B, you'll have, for example, a procurement team involved or a legal team, or, you know, all of these other stakeholders that you wouldn't necessarily have it, well, you wouldn't have involved basically in a B2C business. So you do want to create content that is able to answer all of those questions as well, which is kind of why when I categorize my keyword research, I look at categorizing by target audience as well, because obviously that way it helps you understand, you know, what content are you creating, what content's already there for each target audience, but what do you need to create that you haven't already? And it's just much easier to do that when you actually already know who's going to be searching for what.
Makes sense. Well, thank you so much, Evie. We're at time. I try and keep this very much to time in terms of 30 minutes. So thank you so much. Thank you for the guys that joined and the great questions here. As I said, I will share this with the wider community on the recording and also the presentation as well. Thanks a lot, you guys.
Well,
See you
thanks
again next
everyone.
fortnight.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Ed. Thanks Evie.
Cheers.